things are so important.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I think there's a movement towards that.
Yeah, and in 2006, a few months after the book came out, friends and I put on a Magdalene Mass in Boulder. We rented a church, United Church of Christ church that was wooden, and it was circular. It was actually octagonal, but it had a labyrinth outside, and it was way out near the mountains, so deer were walking around, and we put on a community Magdalene Mass, and we had, it was mainly my friends, so it was women, and we had live music. We had, I did the officiating, but there were all sorts of other people that came up and spoke. We read textual quotes. We had meditation. We had food, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful celebration in the community. And I haven't repeated that, so I want to do that again soon. It was on her feast day, but it doesn't have to be. But it can. But then it doesn't have to be such a big event. It could be a group that meets once a month in in a coffee shop, which I also ran one of those groups for quite a while. And or it could be you having a couple people over in your living room and just talking about Magdalene. So, of course, you could offer classes or whatever else, but this is more of a non-hierarchical way of coming together and learning about Magdalene and really experiencing her energy. And right before I came to this conference, I talked with a dear friend of mine who lived in France for a long time. She married a Frenchman, and they lived near Nice and so forth. And she's very much interested in Magdalene. And we talked about how the online communities of Magdalene are wonderful. The classes, it provides great access for people, but there's something really special about coming together physically. And there's a tradition in Judaism called chavruta, which means studying with a partner. So traditionally you don't study alone in the Jewish tradition. You study always with a partner. And Cynthia and I were talking about how when that happens, when you come together with a partner and talk about, for example, Magdalene or different texts that you're interested in around Magdalene and so forth, you're both bringing your perspective, but within this dyad, a third energy comes up, and it's the teacher. It's Magdalene, it's Yeshua, if those are the subjects you're discussing. And because you are both available to that energy, it's transformative. You'll get new insights and realizations. And I just don't think this is going to happen in the same way online. You really need to feel that physical energy. And Yeshua talked about it, if it is indeed his quote. I don't know. Whenever two or more are gathered in my name, there I am. And it's that energy that is whipped up in a sense, and opens the people who are studying to new realizations, and they're also mirror to each other. So you get more and more depth in your studying when you're working with a partner. And so that's another thing that I would like to see is eventually somehow setting up where people can come together and study texts and work with Magdalene and Yeshua in those ways.
Do you have any question in your mind when you're dealing with them as present about identity?
About their cosmological identity?
Yeah, who it is you're addressing?
I have my own idea. Yeah, like I said, sort of the Gnostic way showers who come and break through and show a way to reconnect with the all. And I do reverberate strongly with the Gospel of Mary and Magdalene's depiction there of a leader of the community who has special knowledge she received from Yeshua, that she was his beloved companion, and that she has probably more information than the other disciples as to what Yeshua taught. Again, I'm not going to argue that with
Sure.
anyone.
No,
it's just my
I'm
personal...
not asking about
Right,
argument.
right, so
I'm
I
talking
do
about
have
your,
that.
your own
Right.
sensibility is really what I'm asking
And I
about.
do see Yeshua as, I've never seen him, because I've never been a Christian, and I never went to Sunday school. I don't have that training at all, so it was very easy for me to see him as a Jewish teacher, a rabbi, someone who taught mysticism, and there are arguments that I find interesting, that he was from the Babylonian school of Jewish mysticism, and not so much the Jerusalem school, but he was coming from a different perspective with mystical teachings. And then when he talks about, he uses the word Malkut when he's talking about the kingdom. Well, he uses Malkut, which has been translated into the kingdom of God, usually. Malkut in Aramaic and in Hebrew means sovereignty. And so it's been translated into this kingdom of God, but one could argue that's not exactly what he taught. I'm not going to go deeply into this. If you're interested, there's a man named Dr. Louis Kaiser, Keizer, who's a biblical scholar and former Episcopal priest, who has a website, wisdomseminars.org. He talks a lot about this. I'm not endorsing all his theories, but it's quite interesting, and he does have a background in Aramaic and Coptic and so forth. So if you want to find out more about what he considers Jesus' original teachings to be, that might be a place to explore a little bit. So that's what I come to as their identity in that way. Yeah.
Well, I had a question for you though,
Yeah.
at some point. So in my paper, I was talking about how Mary Magdalene could be a bridge between the Christian world and the Jewish world, and even possibly the Islamic world. But I wondered if you know, because you straddle different definitions and you're more a Gnostic than anything, it seems to me. Have you given this talk to any synagogues? Is there anyone working in the Jewish community that you know of who are working with the Magdalene energy in the way that you're doing? Or are you unique? You can't be the only Jewish woman in America that's doing this. Aren't there other Jewish women who've discovered Magdalene and are reclaiming
I'm sure there are.
Jewish?
Well, I'm sure there are. I'm not really in touch with them. And as far as the Jewish culture and its openness to Christianity, I mean, they will do interreligious dialogue, but really, I mean...
You've never done this talk in downtown synagogues in Boulder?
No. Oh, well, in Boulder, that I'm sure it would go over very well. It's a special place. But no, I haven't, and I don't talk about my. So I've been a member of synagogues, and mostly liberal synagogues, and it's not really a positive thing that you say that you're working with Yeshua and Magdalene. In Jewish culture, you have to understand that traditionally, at least in the Ashkenazi world, the Eastern European, they would call Jesus that man. They vilified him because they see him as the founder of this religion that is dedicated to exterminating Jews. What has Christianity done for Jews except, for the most part, try to annihilate them? You can look throughout history and...
So there's some problems to get over here.
That's a big problem. There are.
There's a few hurdles.
There's
A little hurdle, yeah. So, you don't really bring up Yeshua in Jewish in
'Cause
the
can
Jewish
I-
community.
Can
Yeah.
I just make a suggestion on how one could, if one was to?
If one
If one
wanted
was
to.
invited, because I've worked with many different faith groups.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was a good friend of Rabbi Friedlander and other Jewish communities, and
Yeah.
spent time in Israel with Kabbalists and studied Kabbalah a lot.
Right,
There's
right.
a tradition of the ecstatic Kabbalah, and there's a wonderful book by Kaplan called Meditation in the Kabbalah.
Right, all right.
And it's a recognised process in the Kabbalah that when a sage, you know, the studying together thing, you can do that with somebody who's dead and out of body.
Right.
And a good pupil will contact the spirit of their revered teacher, who they may never have met in this body. It could be someone famous like Elijah or a prophet, or it could be just Rabbi somebody or other that, you know, was around a few hundred years ago. And it's accepted practice in Kabbalah to commune with their spirit and to be inspired by it and taught by it. And it seems to me that a lot of what we're talking about and you're talking about is actually exactly that, which is an orthodox practice within esoteric Judaism.
Yeah.
And you know, so that's
That's
one
the key
argument.
is esoteric Judaism.
Yeah, you can only have this conversation with an informed esoteric
Right, and that's
Jewish-
not who belongs to synagogues generally.
Right.
It's much more, I mean, it just is.
Depends which synagogues you go to, I suppose.
Right, I mean, if you
Who's
go to
educating the
a
synagogue?
Jewish renewal synagogue that, you know, comes out of the tradition of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Salome, who taught at Boulder, yes, they would be much more open to that.
Or the
But-
Tikkun movement or something like that, yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe the Tikkun movement. But for your, you know, those groups are not very, very common in most communities. Like, for example, in Denver, which has a large Jewish community, it's a large city, there's not one Jewish renewal synagogue.
Is that right?
There is nothing.
Huh,
There's
I didn't
nothing.
know
There's
that.
one in Boulder, but there's nothing. There's one in Santa Fe, but there's nothing in Denver.
There's not even a synagogue of any kind.
No, there's synagogues, but they're
more
much
orthodox.
more, you know, prosaic. People go because it's a community, and you want to go and send your children to Hebrew school, and you belong to a synagogue, and you have, you know, celebrate the holidays, Passover and Yom Kippur and so forth. But most people are not. There are always a few, and you know, I did teach at my synagogue, and I taught about Rabbi Nachman. Who's a mystic, who's a mystic, and most people really couldn't get their heads around it. The rabbi, this woman, just looked at me like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, she respected me, but she just couldn't. They tend to be very, you know, most people are very like nuts and bolts, you know, and
But he's one of the greatest ever Kabbalists and rabbis.
right.
Oh,
But that's
Jewish
another thing.
history.
Most Jews are not interested
From
in
the
Kabbalah.
Ukraine, which is falling apart.
Right.
And I've been saying for years we should resurrect him and get him doing peace work. You know.
Yeah, we did think he was the Messiah, but
Right.
yeah,
Well,
he
he is
may
a
have
Messiah.
been. I don't know. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, pardon?
I was wondering if have you yourself ever felt the influence of Elijah or one of the prophets? Would they
You know, I never
belong
really thought
within
about
the
that.
idiom of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that could be, and definitely Yeshua, you know, as a prophet. However, most of the prophets we know about, we're talking about very different things, like, you know, observing the commandments so
Sure.
God won't be angry at you. And of course, that's all we have are the texts that were kept and written down. We don't know, and there were many different groups of Jews that had different opinions, and the Jews that the tradition that's come down was the victor, and you know, the textual wars in a sense. And
I
so
found
don't know.
students of all kinds very open to Enoch.
Right, and
as
that's
a
a huge
possible.
subject in esoteric
Right.
Judaism. Yeah, and
Does the work of Enoch find its way outside that? I found some evidence to indicate that there
I
are
think
readers
so.
willing to open the door to that in the way they aren't for other figures.
You know, that really falls more into kind of traditional Western esotericism and ceremonial magic,
does.
and I have not done a lot of work in that area at all, but definitely that is a subject of interest in you know, ceremonial magic. Jewish and non-Jewish.
Right.
Probably more
Yeah.
non-Jewish.
If anyone wants details on Enoch, there's a 3-disc commentary on the 3
Oh.
books of Enoch over there. That took me 3 years' work at the castle. And also
Oh.
some seminars on John Dee, who of course was
Right,
into Enoch
he's
and
good.
stuff. Enoch was invoked by Renaissance magi, including
Right.
Postel, Guillaume Postel, French
Mhm.
magus. He was equivalent of John Dee, who was protege of Francois I, who you know, is relevant to
Right.
this discussion. You've probably
Right.
come across them.
Yeah, and so that's more, that's kind of what I haven't been really working in that area.
And he'd studied Kabbalah in Venice. You know, Postel was the one that
Right,
said,
and-
if only we all study Kabbalah, the distinctions between Jewish, Islamic, and Christian religion would fade away. You know,
Yeah,
and I agree with him.
yeah, although except, you know, Jewish Kabbalah is different than Christian medieval Kabbalah in certain ways.
Fair point.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just saying there are differences that arose. But this is kind of getting off our subject of Magdalene at the moment. It gets, and I don't, yeah, it takes a certain context to be discussing these things. But yeah, what did I? Oh,
I was asking if you got ever gave
Oh,
us
the
talk
Ju-
to Jewish
I
communities.
haven't, you
That's
know,
what
because
led us
I'm
down a
not
tangent.
out. I'm not out to them. You know, I did tell because I am ordained. It's funnily, which I don't see as a anyway. I'm ordained as an independent Catholic priest. I was ordained how long ago? 2003. So 15 years ago.
Where were you ordained?
I was ordained in Colorado by a woman archbishop who had been an archbishop for 25 years and founded a church called the New Order of Glastonbury.
Mm-hmm.
And I had known a lot of independent Catholic. I was very integrated in that community across the country and the world, but I didn't find anyone I wanted to get ordained by. I think I needed to be ordained by a woman.
Right.
But also, as if some of you are wondering what independent Catholicism is, it's a lineage that developed kind of in Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, where they kept many of the Catholic traditions, but they're not under Rome. They're not under the authority of Rome. So they're non-Roman Catholics. And that they're not the only group of non-Roman Catholics, but that's another whole church history thing with the Greek Catholics and so forth. But and so you have this lineage that has spread all over the world now in the last 100 years or so, and there's Gnostic churches that are part of this lineage, very liberal, metaphysical churches. Then you have very, very conservative churches, such as people who think the Pope is not valid because he's way too liberal. You know, they denounce the current Catholic Church as not Catholic enough. So I was ordained within this lineage by a very liberal, kind of metaphysical, independent church, and there were no doctrinal tests. You didn't have to say, oh, I believe in Jesus, or I believe this baptism is cleansing. So I went through the different rituals, but I always did it with the Jewish sort of mindset, like, oh, we're doing the mikveh now, which is the ritual bath when I do but because of my really deep involvement with Catholicism on a cultural and kind of spiritual level, I liked that tradition. So I'm Jewish, and I'm also an ordained sort of Gnostic Catholic priest. I don't really do that so much anymore, but
Oh,
I did.
once a priest, always a priest.
That's right. You can't get out of it. Yeah, so that's what we were kind of talking about, the independent Catholic churches. So, does anyone have any questions for me at this point, or ideas about how we organize? Yes.
I just had a thought that what Thomas was talking about earlier it is all about identity, and it's a very precarious area. I have a very good friend called Gilad Atzmon, who's the most sensational jazz musician you ever heard. He's wonderful. But he was brought up in a very traditional Jewish household. In fact, his grandfather had been a member of the Stern Gang. You know, they were that
Yeah.
Jewish.
Yeah.
My grandfather was in the Purple Gang.
Well, there you go. Yeah? And so
They're Jewish gangsters.
he was
That's what
brought up
Yeah.
in a traditional Jewish way, and he joined the army, and as
Yeah.
all Jews have to do. And they took him to Lebanon one day, and they showed him the camp. And he said, "What the hell's going on here? What are we Jews running a concentration camp for,
Right.
you know?" And so he left as soon as he could get out of the army, you know, and came to England and became a prominent jazz musician. But the interesting thing is that he tried to rationalise that, and he wrote a book called The Wandering Who, which is about, you know, the search for the Jewish identity, you know. And he has become so ostracised, he's the worst anti-Semitic person in the world now, you know. He's you know, I mean, he turns up for gigs and they've cancelled them, you know, all sorts of things, you know. It's very strange. But, you know, he's stuck with it because it's a very important thing, is to find your own identity, you know.
I've got an observation,
Yes.
sort of question, stroke
Sure,
observation. It's one of my unfinished writing projects that's occurred to me over the years, which might be helpful here. And you talked about, you know, how it would be so difficult for you to come out as interested in Yeshua and Mary Magdalene in a Jewish synagogue. You'd be kind of laughed out because it's not kosher, you know. And no doubt there'd be some Catholic churches where it'd be very dangerous for you to come out and say, well, actually, I'm Jewish and I study esoteric Judaism and blah, blah. So, if we're going to transcend those, you know, that separateness, apartheid is the political manifestation of a metaphysical thing of separateness. If we accept poly-identity, that we can all be many things, as I said in my talk this morning, then, you know, and we redefine God as a verb and a process, as Whitehead said, rather than it's a fixed thing with a noun and a name. The mistake has been all along to think of God as a totem, who's the head of our tribe. It's the totem on our flag, the Trinity or the Absolute or the Allah or whatever, you know, give it names. If we think it's a process of interconnectivity, if we redefine God as love, which is the process of interconnectivity between separate souls, there's got to be a medium that binds us all. And that is I mean, we can call it love in English. It's got, you know. Then the problem of identity becomes less, because we're all just fish swimming in the sea of the absolute. And we all have different journeys. Like you're born in Berkeley, I was born in Montreal, Bruce was born in New England somewhere. You know, we all have our own stories. We're just fish swimming around in the great sea of togetherness. And so the question of heresy wouldn't come up, you know, and we're all Orthodox. You know, I think, like Bruce said in the beginning of his lecture, we've got to pay attention to texts still, and not say, oh, well, we're all mystics gone beyond text, because if we do that, we hand over the power of the text to the really stupid people. Right? So it's the same with you know, with these labels, like Jewish or Christian or, you know, Muslim. I think the people of wisdom have to actually be there in the synagogues and the mosques and the churches, and speak up for universalism there. You know, so I think it's fine if you come out wherever.
Yeah.
You know, be
Well-
brave and proud.
Well, maybe not in the synagogue tomorrow.
Well, the thing is, I don't even belong to a synagogue
Right.
anymore. And because it is, to be
Getting harder,
honest,
yeah.
I don't know, and maybe Nona can talk, because she grew up, of course, Jewish, she's Jewish. They tend to be fairly mundane. You know, I mean, you know, there's the services and so forth, and there's, you know, momentary senses of togetherness or realization or whatever, but generally, it's not a group of, highly enlightened people discussing issues like this. It's people, who come because they want their kids educated in Hebrew, or they're the kind of people that I don't really spend a lot of time with, not because I'm better, but because I just don't have the same interests. And so, and also it's often very much family-centered, so you've got that. They don't really, it's not that they don't welcome single people, but it's just they don't have any place for them really, especially in Judaism, where it's a very coupled off tradition with no monastic, tradition at all.
So just my final
Yeah.
question about that, reclaiming the texts. I've scratched away in the word synagogue, which is a Greek word. People may or may not know this. I'm sure you two do. But it means that which brings people together. Sin is together. It's a Greek word, so that's weird. The Jewish community are defining their self-identity in Greek. And the synagogue is the place which leads, agog, again, to togetherness. So we are a synagogue right now because we're trying to work together to a common understanding. Anything that brings people together, is synagogue, really. And
Right.
we
No,
don't
I
need to put a
take your
religious
point.
label on it. So.
Right, no, I take your point, but it's, so I have a certain amount of energy, and do I want to put it into,
Right.
being a reformer sort of, or in
Sure, there's limits,
Jewish...
we can all do.
Yeah, or do I want to spend it, at meetings like this and working with people that are already interested? And, I think you may underestimate the strength of the Jewish culture. I mean, if you're not raised in it, just like I wasn't raised in Protestantism, or I wasn't really raised in Catholicism, or there is it has more of a tribal feel than I think most traditions, because it is a tribe. It's not just a religion, but it's a tribe. There's a biological component to it, even though they accept converts. And so even converts are seen as not really fully part of the Jewish people. They are, in a sense, would you agree with that?
Mhm.
Oh,
I would
totally.
agree with it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jews have always accepted converts, but in practice, they're always seen as converts. Oh yeah, she's the convert.
Right.
And it's because and I'm not saying tribal consciousness is good or not, but that's just the way it is. And, I don't spend I do go to some of the important holidays at synagogues, but I'm not really part of a synagogue culture any longer, because there's just no place for me really there. I'd rather put my energies into somewhere else.
There's
But-
another way of looking at it, and I'm thinking about revising and reviewing who the tribe is. Instead of looking to come out within a tribe that is a closed tribe, that don't want to know anyway, you're looking at a tribe like this, because if you get a whole group of people together, whichever country you're in, you get a whole load of people together, like us, and you ask how many Jews in the room, how many Catholics in the room, how many people are a little bit Jewish, a little bit Catholic, a little bit Irish, you'll find that is the tribe. And they might be the people that would be really open to what you're saying.
Right. And I think there are Jewish leaders now that are much more open-minded about Jesus. And there was a book by a rabbi not that long ago. I forgot what it was called, but Jesus the Jew and Geza
Geza
And
Vermeer.
Mary
Yeah.
Williamson, she's a Jewish that
Right,
teaches
right.
A Course in Miracles, and she's,
Right. I mean, there's a,
yeah.
She's a new
Inclusion.
age person.
Yeah, she's,
But,
Uh,
but she really does
Mhm.
invoke that.
Well, we've got Starhawk is also Jewish. She's a great pagan.
like,
a
well, most of the Buddhist leaders are Jewish. I mean, it's just like the Hindu leaders, it's
Really?
true. The Taoists, but they're not really working in the communities. And I just would think, but I think the people that they'll listen to, the Jewish communities will listen to are the leaders within their communities, the rabbis, who are starting to revision Jesus. But that's not without controversy, of course, within the Jewish, so, but it
I-
doesn't feel
I
like it's
can-
my work. I mean, I do take your point, and it's a wonderful idea.
No, I'm just throwing ideas out. Can I throw out another idea?
Sure.
I mean,
Nona can maybe do that.
Yeah.
have you got an idea for one?
Oh, sure.
Do you want to comment on what we've been talking about?
Oh, well,
Were you brought up in an Orthodox Jewish?
no,
No.
no, I'm culturally Jewish, but I
Mhm.
don't have any connection with with Jewish religion.
Mm.
I mean, I am Jewish, there's no, but it feels very cultural and it's very, my lineage is, I'm very aware of my ancestors and what they went through, the ones that are left, which are very
Mm.
few.
Mm.
My grandparents, I'm a second generation American, so my grandparents came from Russia and Poland and they had to escape and they lost most of their family, my family. So I have all of that going on. But religion-wise, I'm not very interested in organized religion at all, so, on any level, but.
And one thing about Jews is it doesn't matter if you believe in God. It's a very different culture than Christianity in that nobody talks to Jews. You don't talk with another Jew about, oh, what do you believe? What do you think about, physical resurrection? Or they don't talk about
No.
theology. It's not, they don't break apart, denominations over a tiny point of theology like the Protestants, It's not talked about. It's a community based on praxis, on
Practice, yeah.
And on survival.
congregational
Survival,
praxis,
for
right?
sure.
And and teaching the young the traditions and so forth. But most Jews, they have no interest in God,
Mhm.
or they have a kind of a vague interest. You can say I'm an atheist and you're still Jewish. It's not based on religious belief.
Right.
Even if you convert, you're still to Christianity. You're still Jewish. You can never get out of it. So it's a different way of thinking than Christianity, which is based on accepting a certain doctrine. You're just automatically part of this tribe, whatever you believe and whatever.
My husband's Jewish, and when he met me, I would say the word God or this, and he goes, I don't speak those words. I don't speak Jesus. I don't speak, he's shifted because he's been with me, but it's so true he goes, we didn't have that growing up. That's not what that wasn't what we were part of. It was like you said, it was
Right.
the tribe, it was the culture, it was,
Mm-hmm.
surviving what had happened to the families and the lineage and things like that.
I've been thinking about puzzling over this for a while, and I've created this concept of non-God talk. There's a certain sociological phenomenon in modern secular societies, increasing in power and influence, where to talk of God is actually forbidden, or certainly not acceptable, not kosher. And it's growing all the time. I know this as a teacher of religious studies in largely secular schools in Britain, which is an increasingly secular society. And the response of secularism to multiculturalism is to say, well, we'll abolish all talk of God. That way we'll get rid of all distinctions. I've traced that back. The percentage of non-God talk among Jews is higher than among Christians. And I know many Jewish families who became very active socially, like socialists, communists,
Right.
Like my
on the left,
Mhm.
like the circle my parents moved in, they were communists, and all their best friends were communist Jews in Montreal in the 50s. And God talk wasn't part of their language. It was social revolution, etc., etc. And so if you trace it back to the kind of some of the radical Kabbalists who said, yes, we shouldn't be talking about God, we should be doing it. It's an orthopraxy. And to talk of God is not necessary, we should live it. But I think the non-God talk tradition